Imagine the killing fields of California. What is this that is going on? What is happening to the people that are being sprayed by malathion? If you listen to the CDFA, it sounds like nothing. Their illnesses are imaginary. But a few of my guests today may contradict those opinions that we're hearing from the officials. And I want to welcome these guests to our show. It's a pleasure to have you here, Oscar,
Thank you.
Richard, and Jorge. I wanted to start off with Jorge. I guess the first question is very simple, is what is malathion? And maybe you could tell me exactly how this chemical works within the human body.
Well, malathion is an organophosphate pesticide. It's been used widely throughout the world for a very good reason, and that is because it's a very effective poison. The only reason malathion was developed, synthesized, and used is for its ability to inflict damage to living tissues. The way it kills those animals that we consider pests in agricultural fields is by inactivating an enzyme called cholinesterase. Now, cholinesterase job in the human body and in the body of flies, worms, or any other agricultural pests is to limit the action of acetylcholine. What does that mean? Well, the nerve cells in our brain, in our nervous system, which control our respiratory muscles, the muscles of the eye, the muscles of the gastrointestinal system, they control these organs by squirting minute amounts of acetylcholine. When this neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, is released, it activates the muscles as well as glands. What cholinesterase does is inactivate acetylcholine, so its effect would be very short-lived. So your muscles, or the respiratory muscles or muscles of the gastrointestinal system, will not be contracted continuously. What malathion does is to inactivate cholinesterase, inactivate this enzyme, and therefore prolonging the effects of this chemical acetylcholine. And that is why when people are exposed to malathion, they experience overcontraction of the muscles of the gastrointestinal system, experiencing nausea, diarrhea, or vomiting. That is why they also experience difficulties breathing and difficulties focusing the lens in their eyes. They experience blurry vision as well as headaches, irritability, confusion, and a host of other well-documented clinical symptoms.
Now, Richard, I guess you have some practical experience with this, with the organophosphates you work with in the Dominican Republic. Maybe you could elaborate a little on that.
Yes, John. Actually, 2 years ago, I made a documentary about the death of a farm worker through an organophosphate poisoning. The actual organophosphate was called azodrin. It was a chemical which was actually banned in the United States, but actually used in the Dominican Republic. And this particular worker, Juancito, actually sprayed in his garden a dilution of the organophosphate, and it actually went into the pores of his skin and intoxicated him.
So organophosphates penetrate right through the skin?
They go straight through the skin and attack the nervous system, yes. And unfortunately, Juancito died in absolute agony over a 3-day period. Yes, it was quite a terrible case.
Like the convulsions that he was talking about with the inhibitor, the acetylcholine.
That's right. According to the eyewitnesses at the time, it was quite a horrible situation. If you want, I can read a short description from the documentary.
Sure.
It was actually his father, the father of Juancito, actually said that his face looked extraordinary. He expelled through the pores of his body something sticky, a fluid, and he was twisting with pain. He was a strong boy of 160 or 170 pounds, bigger than me, and he struggled and felt very restricted. But he wasn't able to talk. It seemed as if he had pneumonia. It seemed as if he went to his heart, and he vomited and threw up blood and phlegm and guitar. Quite gory stuff. But his sister, who happens to be a nurse, actually went on to say that after he died, he expelled through the pores something sticky, again this fluid, and she thinks it was the poison that went through his mouth, and that's why he actually wore a cotton pad over his mouth, even in his coffin, to stop these toxins still coming out of his body. It was so strong. And in fact, Jorge, you had the case in Riverside, wasn't it, or Orange County, about somebody who actually committed suicide with an organophosphate, and it actually caused several doctors and nurses to collapse, actually, even after she died.
Because of that?
Because it's so strong. Yeah.
Oh.
She didn't commit suicide. She was poisoned, though, by something.
She was poisoned. Oh, I thought she committed suicide. I see.
Okay, well then along that, the thing I hear all the time, and maybe you could elaborate, Oscar, is that the dose makes the poison. Is that true in this case with malathion, that we hear the symptoms of what it can cause you, but in small amounts, is it harmful at all?
Yes, every drop of malathion will cause some damage. The body can take a certain amount of punishment. You have the immune system that will take out, but if the immune system is being attacked simultaneously by several different agents, it can't handle it. You can handle one little boy. He comes at you. And two little boys, probably 3, 4, 5, 6. The immune system can become overloaded so that the 10th little boy that comes at you can do anything he wants because the others are holding you down. This is they call this synergism, is that the malathion is an insult to the body, and you may also be exposed to some other damages, and the combination will be much worse because your immune system is tied up fighting one or the other or both.
Now, Jorge, I guess I wanted to go on to, we've heard short-term effects or symptoms. Maybe if there's a possibility, could you elaborate and tell me what are the long-term effects that could happen? Things that we may not see apparently the first time, or they seem simplified like a little cold or flu symptom, but what would be long-term effects that you're aware of?
Well, the most insidious aspect of this policy of aerially spraying malathion over urban areas is that people will notice the immediate or acute health effects, which range anything from vomiting, diarrhea, nausea, flu-like symptoms, which will go away within a week or two. Now, if they were exposed to a large enough dose, they could go through the experience that Juancito went in the Dominican Republic, and they could die. Now, in the amounts that malathion has been sprayed over urban areas, it's unlikely that those will be large enough to kill somebody. But at the same doses, that people will only experience some discomfort. If the exposure is repeated several times, there is a very well documented body of evidence that indicates that those people can experience long-term delayed neurotoxicity. What that means is that the nervous system will be damaged, that they will experience loss of neuromuscular coordination, they will experience loss of visual acuity. Their visual system will be impaired. Even if the amount is not large enough to cause blindness, months later people will notice that they will need glasses, prescription glasses. In the cases of loss of neuromuscular coordination, they may not notice the difference right away, but their ability to carry out well-coordinated movements will diminish. And that is what's so insidious about this policy, is that people will not know that this is the effect of exposure to malathion because nobody will be monitoring their neuromuscular coordination or their visual acuity over
The
a
public
period of
health
months.
department then doesn't really monitor or keep track after they spray, for example, to see, well, how many people come in ill after the spraying occurs? Do they do that, monitor very strongly?
They don't do that, in spite
That
of
doesn't make sense.
the opinions of a number of health experts, Professor Alfredo Sadun or Myron Moses and others, affiliated with very credible universities. The Department of Health Services has not maintained a monitoring program to find out first what the exposure levels are and what the long-term delayed effects are on people that have been exposed to malathion.
Well, Richard, how did you get involved with all this, with the organophosphates and that, and how did you come to the Dominican Republic to learn about this?
Well, I came to the Dominican Republic to work on a BBC film about the world food situation, and it also skirted on the situation of pesticides and how it has affected the crops of this beautiful island that actually now is going towards a barren economy because of this. And whilst I was there, a friend, in fact Juancito, the gentleman I mentioned before, actually succumbed to the poison, and that's how I got involved with it. But it's interesting, like Jorge was saying, trying to trace actually what caused the person's death is very difficult. And in the third world, for instance the Dominican Republic, very few people will actually attribute a death to anything but the hand of God. So they just do not get reported. It was just very lucky that I was there on the spot and I had the equipment to do it.
So now, that could have a factor, for example, in the United States, we look at migrant workers who are most susceptible to this because they work in the fields undocumented. So there you have a fear already. And that's similar, it sounds like, to what your situation is, where they may not want to report because of fear of deportation or, officials or authorities coming down on them.
That's correct.
Yes, Oscar, you had something to add.
There's a comment about Dr. Jorge Mancilla mentioned about the concentration that people aren't exposed. The amount that's being spread isn't very much. That's a deceptive statement that the agricultural people are making, because this is not being sprayed on a billiard table or a football field that stretches endlessly. There are hills and valleys, there are houses, and it's been documented from a meteorological standpoint when the helicopter, depends on the direction it's approaching, say an obstruction, it's possible that the malathion will be piling up maybe 50 or 100 times more than the so-called average amount, because there are all sorts of obstructions. There are regions where the malathion is concentrated 50 or 100 times more than what they say it is, and there are areas that get nothing at all. And they don't discuss that or mention it at all. So some people could be exposed to a heavy exposure. And this could have happened to this woman in Riverside that was poisoned, and the doctors got sick. I got a call from Corona the night that this occurred and said, "You know where she lives? She lives right next to March Air Force Base." And that's where the helicopters took off. And there's documented cases in the past where the malathion leaked from the tanks and they had to turn back. So it's quite possible that this is something that hasn't been verified to my knowledge, was the path of the helicopters over her home. And she might have somehow either gotten a massive dose from the leaking tanks, which does happen, has happened, or the house could be, or wherever she was, it could be because of the turbulence. I'm a meteorologist, by the way, weatherman, although everybody can understand it, that because of the variation in terrain, the certain areas are going to get 5, 10, 50, 100 times. It's been documented. There's one case where it's 100 times the concentration in a certain corner where the wind blew and it piled up against it. And if anybody happened to be in that corner, they'd be getting a massive dose.
Now, with the concrete, doesn't that also increase the runoff because you don't have it dissipate in the ground?
Oh,
right?
you're talking about the concrete. Now, that's something else. Well, they're spraying it over concrete and everything in the freeways and the streets and highways, and the stuff does dry. And then all the automobiles on the freeways and all the highways and out of your driveway, they're churning it up, and you're driving around in a cloud of malathion. Plus God knows what else. It's maybe more than, because there are secret poisons. The state law says they can add inert ingredients and change it. They can change the amount. So we don't even know if it's malathion, for that matter, because they can do it in accordance with the law.
Now,
the initiative will stop it.
Jorge, I wanted to ask real quick a question with malathion, and you explained one night when you were at a lecture that as it dissipates, or it goes into the ground, that it breaks down, and its breakdown components are even more toxic. And maybe you could explain that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, first, as Oscar was saying, what has been sprayed over urban areas is technical grade malathion. That is not pure malathion.
Commercial,
and a technical grade malathion contains 5% impurities. That is, and there's at least 16 substances which they call inert ingredients, inert only from the point of view of their effectiveness to kill pests, but not from the point of view of harming human health. Second, they also tell you that malathion will break down. It will go away. It will not stay there forever.
Right.
But the fact is that as malathion breaks down, it turns into malooxone, which is even more toxic than malathion. And the CDFA's own measurements of the concentration of malathion in the air as it's evaporating in the days following aerial spraying, and its deposition over the ground, they found that indeed the amount of malathion in the air, the concentration of malathion in the air is decreasing, but at the same time there's a corresponding increase in the levels of malooxone. And I also like to add that Oscar is right, that in the CDFA's own measurements of the rate of deposition, the rate at which malathion deposited in the ground, they were claiming that in Los Angeles, the rate of deposition was 1.4 milligrams per square foot. But their own measurements indicated that the average was much higher than that, at least 50% higher, and that there were areas in which the rate of deposition was almost 5 milligrams per square foot. That's 300% over what they were claiming was the rate of deposition, let alone areas where, because people washed it off with a hose or because of climatic conditions, malathion deposited in higher amounts. It was not surprising, therefore, that every time they spray, people in those areas show the well-documented clinical symptoms of poisoning by organophosphate pesticides.
Now, I guess, Richard, one thing I could elaborate on, when the farmers were working down there in that area for protection, for health reasons, what did they wear, and was it enough?
Well, it's never really enough if you're dealing with an organophosphate. Typically, you should wear gloves and a protective clothing, a mask with a respirator. But we're talking about the tropical temperatures here, and we're dealing with people who are illiterate farm workers, not to do them down, but they don't want to be restricted. So in this particular case, Juancito was wearing a T-shirt with a respirator, but that's all he was using. But enough of his skin was bare to allow the toxins to enter and to cause him ultimate death, actually. But a point I'd like to make is that the substance, the organophosphate called azodrin, was actually banned in the States before it was sold to the Dominican Republic. And when they sell it in the Dominican Republic, it's sold with in a marketing fashion that's very soft. For instance, the bottle is actually, if I could show it here, I don't know whether you could actually spot it there. The bottle looks completely inoffensive. In fact, it shows, it looks like a plant on the label. But actually, in small characters at the bottom, it has the skull's head, which denotes a poison.
Right.
Okay. And on the back, it actually says it's a category 1 poison. In other words, the strongest. Now, the manufacturers are supposed to actually supply the clothing to protect them, but they don't. And when I investigated, I went to the government agency in the Dominican Republic. They sold it to us over the counter without any advice whatsoever. And behind the counter, there was an advertisement from the manufacturers of another pesticide where a woman was wearing a bikini and spraying with a bomb on her back. She was actually spraying. And when I asked the young guy in the shop, I said, why is she wearing a bikini? And he said, well, it's just water. She's not really spraying pesticides. So they don't make the leap between the advertising and reality.
Right.
So it's actively going against the people, the actual government input.
Now, Oscar, maybe you can add on to that, because what I've read, I have a friend of mine that's a teacher's aide, I'm a teacher myself, who her husband works in the fields, and they have to wear protective, they're supposed to wear it, and many of them get sick anyway with protective gear and everything. Yet, are those same warnings given to the public when they spray in public domain over properties? Are we giving those warnings?
No, they give the warning when there's a loud outcry in certain areas. Then they will give a warning, but they're always trying to avoid warning, and they're not doing it in many places.
Cover your car, but not yourself.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Well, I have to mention about warning and not warning. Say when they find a fly, first they will ground spray with diazinon, which is 10 times more. They acknowledge it's more poisonous than malathion.
Right.
Now, the EPA just several years ago outlawed the use of diazinon in golf courses in saddled areas because they had found there were 66 cases of massive bird kills in 18 different states. So diazinon can't be used in golf courses and in grassy areas, but they can go in your property and soak the ground. They say it's a soak with diazinon. So it's a real sinister little game they're playing, and apparently I've got from the supervisor entomologist's letter, which he said is that you can request them not to do it. They'll leave a sign. And apparently 2 people that said did request it, and they didn't
obey the sign.
But this is what that maybe if they request it, they can get away from it. But it's a bad business, spraying diazinon. Oh, and I have to tie in with the spraying of diazinon. About a month ago, I got a report from the agriculture department. They had called in 5 doctors, PhDs, various things from foreign countries, and a report on the metfly situation in Southern California. And an interesting article, maybe 20, 30 pages, but there's one paragraph there that I took a double take. They release the sterile, say they find a fly. They'll release the sterile flies, and as much as 4 days later, they'll still spray with diazinon, with poison. They're killing the sterile flies.
Yeah, of course.
And of course, the diazinon is down for about 2 weeks or so. They spray every couple of weeks. So they're releasing the sterile flies and releasing the poison afterwards, and they're killing the sterile flies. So this is one of the issues what we've got to fight, is to make sure that they're not destroying. They will be using the sterile flies properly, not release any poison when they release them, and second, to make sure that they don't use the sterile flies in one corner of the house and not in the other corner, and then switch over. This is no way to treat all of Los Angeles and all of Southern California, for that matter, is release sterile flies in one area. And it's documented now that from Spaugi, that he says the flies, the met flies have been eradicated in the area where they used it.
Sounds like kind of when you have roaches next door to your neighbor, you eradicate from your house, but you know nothing about your neighbor, so then they're going to be over there and come back over again.
And they're going to prove that the sterile meth flies won't work. This is their game. So this is why we have to apply a bright light on this,
right?
So that the battle continues. We've won a major victory that they're using the sterile flies.
Right.
But now they're trying to figure out ways and means to undermine it,
right,
saying that we're going to eradicate it, and of course they can't eradicate it for reasons I mentioned earlier.
Right.
And in addition, they're actually spraying. They're doing it in a cunning manner. Just one section, then another section. But we have it on record now that he did in a substantial area that it was eradicated, and they stopped releasing the sterile flies. So we have it on record that they work.
So it does work. Now, Jorge, I want to get more into some technical things with health issues. What people are most at risk? And I'll name a few groups, for example, that I have read about in the report. Maybe you can tell us why. Children, young children, chemically sensitive people, and perhaps maybe elderly and so forth. I guess everyone is at risk, but maybe why are these people in particular?
Yeah. Well, of course, everyone is at risk. It all depends on the amount of malathion that one is exposed to. The reason that we talk about especially vulnerable people, people that are especially at risk, is because the effect of a poison depends not only on the dose and its potency, but also on the ability of the body to fight it off. That is, malathion is metabolized by the body. As it goes through the liver, it's destroyed by an enzyme in our liver. Older people, young children, have less of that enzymatic activity. Therefore, malathion stays in the bloodstream longer, causing more damage.
So they can't secrete it as easily.
They can destroy it and secrete it through their kidney. They don't have the ability to fight it off as well, to break it down. In addition, people with liver diseases or with jaundice, for example, are less capable of fighting it off. But there's also a large number of people who are receiving medications for visual disturbances, for psychiatric illnesses, and these medications again alter this neurotransmitter acetylcholine. So in combination, those medications in combination with malathion have a larger effect, negative effect on the body. There's a synergistic effect, there's this combined effect that makes those people more vulnerable. But those people, these are just, if you wish, the red flag, the warning flag that alerts us to the risks of malathion for the rest of the population. The case of Juancito, for example, that Philip documented, is very telling. It just reminds us how dangerous these substances are. These are not substances that were ever designed to be sprayed over urban areas. In the past, they have been approved, and even some of us even have questions about their use, but they have been approved in agricultural areas under very controlled conditions, in areas where people don't live, where they have to use protective gear, and where they are not supposed to return until several days later. Now, spraying it over densely populated urban areas is a totally different proposition. You have groups that are especially at risk. You have all kinds of other chemical substances in the environment that can act synergistically with it. It's just really not sound policy.
I don't think also that there is adequate protection even if you wear a complete suit, because it's been proven in tests that when you're using certain types of spray guns, the spray breaks up into very tiny particles which actually penetrate the suit. And if you're in a hot country, that exacerbates the effect of the toxin. It actually stays like an oven inside your body and increases the toxins inside you. So short of using a chemical warfare suit, I don't think you'd be safe, quite honestly.
So, yeah.
Isn't it true, Dr. Macias, that people who are alcoholic, severely alcoholic, and they go into what's known as the DTs, the delirium tremens, is exactly what happens with the malathion? I mean, when people are poisoned, that they lose control of their muscles because cholesterol is so that anybody who drinks, and drinks heavily, or even any kind of alcohol, lowers the cholinesterol level. It would be wise if you get caught in the spray zone, is to somehow back away from the amount you're drinking.
Well, absolutely. I mean, a few years ago, I published a report in the journal Science showing that alcohol potentiates, it increases the activity of acetylcholine. Malathion is also having that effect, so the combined effect of drinking alcohol and being exposed to malathion will be more potent than in another person. And yeah, the point that Philip was making is very true. Even in the United States, where presumably we have the best regulations to control, to make the use of pesticides in agriculture very judicious.
For example, supposedly.
Even in that case, even in this country, we have over 300,000 cases of agricultural workers that are affected negatively by exposure to pesticides. And only 1% of those, according to the Office of Technology Assessment of the U.S. Congress, is reported.
Like the one boy you mentioned, and I guess you guys can elaborate, the boy who was nearly blinded, I guess, from the downfall from the malathion hitting him directly. There was a suit that was filed, but supposedly the state is not liable, and neither is the manufacturer. No one's liable if someone's injured. Is that correct?
Well, this is talking about the case of Johnny Macias. Johnny Macias is blind.
Right.
He's completely blind.
And it was directly from the insecticide.
Yes, it was established that it was caused by exposure to malathion. His doctor, Alfredo Sadun, was able to pinpoint the cause. There's also the case of Lorenzo Ulloa, who suffered partial loss of vision, and there may be thousands of people who experience loss of visual acuity, who don't see as well as they did before, and are now wearing glasses or had to change their prescription, and have no idea that this was caused by exposure to malathion.
Like he said, because in the country, Richard had pointed out, Dominican Republic, most people don't report it even. Even if they did, the public health officials may not report it. Am I correct?
Yes, it's a cultural thing, actually, because they believe so much in fate and the power of God that everything is the hand of God, basically.
And do they trust authority? That's another question, too, I guess you'd say.
No, but they don't align the two.
Well, I wanted to thank all of you for coming. I'm sorry we ran out of time so quick. Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you, Jorge. Imagine the killing fields of California. I suggest you get an opportunity to read this book, A Higher Form of Killing also, which tells you about the creation of organophosphates during World War II by I.G. Farben employee William Shader, and they're used for chemical weapons. You may want to refer to that and find out more about organophosphates. Thank you.